tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
There are Liberal MPs that were just elected for the first time in 2019 or 2021. And they're kind of in the position now of saying, I haven't really had a chance to do anything, but already I'm about to be shown the door. And this happened to a lot of Conservative MPs in 2011 when Harper won his majority. They were elected in the Greater Toronto area and places such as Aurora and Oshawa. Well, not Oshawa, that's a Conservative riding, but Aurora, Newmarket, and Markham, and Mississauga. And you had all of these one-term MPs that they got in, they served one term, and then they were out the door because Harper couldn't hold on to his government when 2015 came around. So that's where you have, I think, this looking really bad for Liberal members of Parliament. And will they decide once and for all it's time to start calling for Justin Trudeau's political head on a political platter? I don't want anyone to get any ideas about, me suggesting something, untoward. But that's effectively the decision going on here. So, look, we can go and talk about, this poll went this way, or maybe this sign did this, or this canvassing did this. But there's a bigger picture here that we should not lose sight of. And we'll be talking in a little bit with Raheem Mohammed in the National Post, who has had some, he has interesting thoughts on pretty much everything, but definitely some interesting thoughts on this. But I want to welcome in to talk about the psychology of Justin Trudeau on this almost. Paul Wells, because journalist Paul Wells wrote a book that was very fascinating. And we actually share a publisher in Ken White of Sutherland House. And he wrote about this called Justin Trudeau on the Ropes, Governing in Troubled Times. And he joins me now. Paul, it's good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Hi, Andrew. How are you?
I'm doing well. I should just say to hit this, right out of the gate, you had done what I think a lot of people did, which is like you went to bed thinking the Liberals had won, and then you woke up in the morning and had to write a mea culpa on this. And I just get away from that by not making predictions, because then I don't have to be wrong ever, whereas you take the swing. But before you saw the vote yesterday, what did you think was going to happen? Before you saw the numbers come in and kind of concluded it was over?
So I happened to be in the riding. I'm not in Toronto that often, but I happened to be there a couple of weeks ago, and I ran into a bunch of Liberals who were really nervous, and a couple who, reading between the line, were not super interested in voting Liberal. They thought it was time to send Justin Trudeau a message. And I was at a fancy Ottawa garden party just before the returns came in, and I ran into a former senior public servant, now retired, who I believe has voted Liberal in most elections in their life. And they said, I wish I lived in Toronto St. Paul because I would use my vote to send Trudeau a message. And so I knew they were heading for trouble, but they would have to have a lot of trouble before they lost. And so I was open to the very strong possibility that it was going to be tight, but not lost for the Liberals. And that was why I believe the early returns the way I did.
Justin Trudeau has in the past been incredibly dismissive of anything that everyone else kind of uses to say that he's in trouble. I mean, poll numbers are a great example of this. And obviously you should be aware of polls and not give them too much stock. But there was that line he gave to David Cochrane not that long ago about how, Canadians aren't in a decision mode right now. Yeah. And that's why they're saying they'll vote for Poilievre. And then yesterday in Toronto, St. Paul's, they are in decision mode. And he's not really ever shown any overt sense that he gets it. And I'm curious what your take on that is. What would it take for him to really realize, hey, I'm the problem?
So when magazines started publishing photos of him in blackface, he this is now 5 years ago, but he suddenly had to admit that in fact he had worn blackface and that was a mistake. Confronted with absolutely stark evidence. You've been on the air. I don't know if you saw. He sent out a communique less than an hour ago, in which he says, "Okay, I get it. This was bad. This shows that we have work to do." But it's very much classic first draft Trudeau. It's like the statements he made after the SNC Lavalin story broke. He understands our concern and he promises to do better. And I think a lot of people, including some Liberals, are saying, no, we don't need you to do better. We need you to go. And my hunch is that he's not rejecting that. He's processing it and trying to figure out how much maneuvering room he has.
From your knowledge, I mean, they pick up your. I don't know if they pick up your calls still, but I think historically you've had relatively good access to the Liberals, certainly better than I have, because I don't think they've ever thrown you out of an event. But I'm curious, insofar as you've learned from your contacts and sources in Ottawa, did they have a plan for this? Did they have a plan for what does he do if Don Stewart wins?
It's funny. I was chatting with my wife, who's a consultant and conservative and very politically engaged, as I left the house this morning, and I said, I wonder whether they had a contingency plan. It turns out, so Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, had a very bad election 10 days ago in European elections. And he had been discussing the possibility of an electoral route with his closest advisors for a week. And they came out with an audacious plan to call new legislative elections. And it's not at all clear that it will work, but Macron had a what if we have a bad day plan. I don't know whether the Liberals did. I have begun to put that question to Liberals. But if they did, it would be out of character because they tend to hope for the best, and they corner very badly when things turn out less than the best. I mean, I expect is several days of confusion during which everything the Prime Minister says can be treated as a curiosity rather than as the final word, because it's going to take them days to figure out what they think and what they want to tell us.
There's been, from the Liberal Party, I mean, really going back to 2015, I'd say a public caucus unity that, the past two Conservative leaders would have killed to have, in the sense that you don't see the knives out for Justin Trudeau in the way that Conservatives have historically for their leaders. And I'm wondering if you think that will change now. Will you start to get Liberals that are speaking up a bit more publicly about their concerns? Or do you think that the same pattern we've seen for the last 9 years will continue to hold there?
So now I know someone who has an appointment with Christy Clark today, a long-standing appointment with Christy Clark, social thing, who says the day just got complicated because Christy Clark's phone is ringing off the hook. I expect you could multiply that by about 7 because I expect Anita Annan's having a complicated day, and Sean Fraser, and I have no idea who's making those calls or what the content of those calls are, but I think that that's kind of happening in a lot of corners. One level of taboo has fallen. There hasn't even been much informal discussion about next time post-Trudeau leadership in the Liberal Party, and it hasn't been enforced by above. It's been consensual. Liberals have not felt that it was proper that a leader who gave them a decade in power, or nearly, is owed some deference on these questions. That's gone. At least privately, they are now talking. The next question is, is there going to be public statements? Will any sitting member of caucus, will any of the half dozen cabinet ministers who left on more or less peaceful terms, people like Navdeep Bains and Mark Garneau, and will they start to say something? And my hunch is they won't, not immediately. But new MPs are dragged up the House of Commons by their own leader and by the Prime Minister. Does Justin Trudeau really want to be the Prime Minister who drags the new MP for Toronto St. Paul's up the center aisle of the House of Commons? Man, he has some decisions to make pretty fast.
Yeah, no, I think you raise a valid point there. And I'm also curious, and again, I never like the armchair psychoanalysis of politicians, but with Justin Trudeau, I do find it fascinating because there's something that I've suspected, and I'm curious if you agree or not, that he doesn't really care what party he leaves behind, that he's okay if it sort of is a sinking ship and he takes it down. And I'm not convinced that he's as focused on legacy for the party. And I wonder how, if you take that to a context of the next election, if that weighs in, because I do think the party would have a better time rebuilding. They're certainly not going to win the next election at this stage, even if they have an interim leader. But the reality is they would probably set themselves up a little bit better to start having those succession discussions now instead of, the day after the 2025 election. But I'm curious if I'm projecting something on him that you don't necessarily see.
I had a really chilling moment in conversation with a member of Trudeau's caucus, probably 5 or 6 months ago, where I said, I have always thought that Trudeau, the day he leaves will be the day he stops caring about the future of the Liberal Party. And he just decides that he has to make a decision for himself. And this MP said, do you think he has ever cared about the Liberal Party? It was shattered when he came along, and he used it as a vehicle or a kind of a hitching post for a very personal movement, and that there was never a time when concerns about the future of the Liberal Party without Trudeau weighed much in his own career decisions. It's one thing for me to say that, but for me to hear that from somebody who sits and hears from the Prime Minister every week in Liberal caucus meetings was a different moment. And but I do think that the final calculation, the decision to leave, will be based on whether he's done, not on, and there won't be a lot of bandwidth for thinking about what's going to happen to the Liberal Party next.
I thought my thesis was kind of snarky, but it's not even as audacious or as radical as the one you got from a Liberal member of Parliament. Paul Wells, you can catch him on Substack, many other places, but I love his Substack. I'm a paid subscriber. It's at paulwells.substack.com.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.